Thank you. Okay, and then there was that. Peter, are you good to start? Are you good to start?
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you. Let me just try to log off and log in.
Okay. And then Rhoda, you're ready? Okay, good. So I guess now we just need to wait for Peter to log off and return to us. And then our questions are not going to be difficult ones because I never do. Ever just make them interesting. That's all I will do. We will, at most, we will talk about, we are going to be here for the next 90 minutes, so to an hour and a half. We really just want to talk about elections in our region. So I will call on you to share election experiences from the countries that you're from the last election, and maybe if you want to reference elections from previous years or things like that, and we talk about current situations and maybe touch on the future as well, and how as a region we can improve and hopefully do better.
Right, cool.
Yeah, so it won't be too much, but it will be enough.
Promising.
Okay, so do we have Peter back? Peter, I see you're back. Can you hear us now?
Yes, loud and clear. Sorry about that.
Okay, are you ready to start?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think we can start, and we'll be going live. And as you are aware that this session is being recorded, it is important that I inform you that, and you don't say you recorded me without my knowledge. So you'll see a red button, I think, on your screens that we are now recording, and it will be beamed live. So there'll be people that will be joining in. At some point during the conversation, we will take perhaps comments from people that will have joined us. And if you would like to respond, we will respond. So like I said, we have 90 minutes, and I think we can start because I'm starting my introduction. So I think we can go live now. Good morning, everyone. My name is Patience Piri. Welcome to the Election Resource Center Regional Electalk panel discussion on election dispute resolution. The Southern Africa region has witnessed a rise in the number of contested elections, rising from disputed election processes and results. Recently, from Zambia in 2016, Zimbabwe in 2018, Malawi in 2019, Namibia in 2019, Botswana in 2019, to the DRC in 2019, elections were fiercely contested, leading in some cases to violent demonstrations that resulted in the loss of life. That was the case in Zimbabwe in August 2018. In addition, the region has also seen an increase in election outcomes being determined by the courts of law. In Zambia, after the 2016 election, Zimbabwe 2018, Malawi 2020, Botswana 2020, and Malawi and Namibia, my apologies, 2020. This is a disturbing trend as it points to either a fundamental underlying problem with elections in general or the inability of elections to provide a vehicle that can be used to determine who governs specifically. As a result of the allegations, candidates are more prevalent in presidential elections have resorted to a program we are hoping to share regional experience on elections dispute resolution mechanisms. We are hoping to understand the impact of judicial determined electoral outcomes on democratic participation. We are also hoping to collect evidence and in support of electoral reform in election disputes. So I have amazing people on my panel that are going to bring in their experiences and their knowledge. Okay, because I'm going to be biased, I will start with Zimbabwe. Okay, he's not in Zimbabwe, but Zimbabwe based. Dr. Alex Timagaya, he's a Zimbabwe lawyer, a lecturer of law, a political scientist, and a blogger. He was the technical advisor to the Constitution Parliamentary Select Committee, popularly known as COPAC, and he's also known for his political and social commentary work on issues affecting Zimbabwe. Alex, welcome.
Thank you, Kate, for having us. Thank you so much to ERC.
Okay, so then we move over to Zambia, my home country, my other country. See, I'm an African baby. Peter Mwana Gombe is an elections expert with 9 years experience on elections and electoral processes in Zambia. He's currently the program manager for the Christian Churches Monitoring CCMG of Zambia. Peter is an advocate of human rights, electoral democracy, and good governance. He has authored a chapter on civil and political rights in a publication called A Revolution Revisited, The State of Democracy in Zambia, its State in Transition Observatory. He also sits on the Bloggers of Zambia board as a trustee. Welcome, Peter. Okay. And then we have from Accra, she gave me a warm welcome from Accra this morning, and I'm feeling loved. We've got Rhoda Osei Aful, who is a team leader for elections at the Ghana Center of Democratic Development, CDD Ghana, where she leads the center's election programming, including advocacy for electoral reforms, election observation, and civic education. She also provides technical support to the Coalition of Domestic Election Observers, CODEO, which is hosted at CDD Ghana. Welcome, Rhoda. Okay, and then representing Uganda, we have born and raised in Uganda, Jaffa Makanga is here. He's a holder of a bachelor's degree in arts from Makerere University. He is a revolutionary activist of the People's Power Movement and a member of the National Unity Platform, the NUP, that registered overwhelming support of the people in Uganda in the recent concluded general elections. Hello.
Hello.
How are
I'm
you?
glad to be with you. I'm
Yes.
fine with you.
Fine, thank you. Fine, thank you. We're glad to have you here. While we wait for our other guests to arrive, I think we can start briefly. I think we'll start briefly with Rhoda. What has been your election experience from your country? Okay, you're still on mute.
Sorry, good morning.
morning.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think the headpiece was not working. But earlier I was saying good morning to everyone from Accra. Thank you for the introduction. Speaking generally about Ghana, we just came out from our 8th election since 1992 when we went to democratic rule after a long period of military rule. And speaking generally about election litigation, I think this is something that increasingly we are seeing more and more as far as our electoral process is concerned. I would say that our judiciary seem to have also recognized quite well that they have become quite critical to the electoral process. So from the past several years, we've seen increasingly the judiciary positioning itself to take on its role or this increasing role that stakeholders have been assigning to the judiciary. So the previous Chief Justice, Justice Theodora Wood in particular, initiated what we call the Election Adjudication Manual, where they try to make things pretty simple for the judiciary, for judges, and for all stakeholders who are looking at election petitions in one way or the other. So sort of harmonize all the laws and have also been having some training programs for the judiciary so that they can play that role quite well. And indeed, in 2012, when we had our first presidential election petition, we saw that the judiciary came in quite well. But years down the line, especially in 2016, when we had a number of election-related litigations, not just about the outcome, but in the processes leading to the elections, the 2016 general elections, there were quite a number of election petitions from candidates who didn't understand why they had been disqualified by the Electoral Commission from participating or from pursuing their ambition of contesting for the presidential elections, and who took on the Electoral Commission in court. The judiciary really stepped in because we were almost going to crash on timelines. There were so many issues in various courts, at the High Court, in the Appeals Court, at the lower courts. And the question that some of us were asking was whether we're going to resolve all of them before in good time for us to go into the election. So there was a real danger. But the Chief Justice had instructed that the judiciary or the courts should be able to sit even on weekends so they could dispense the cases as quickly as possible. And so that intervention from the judiciary was trying to resolve all the cases that had come up against the Electoral Commission, which seemed to threaten the progress of the process. That served quite a very useful purpose as far as our processes were concerned. And then, of course, we moving forward to 2020, our last elections, there were all manner of election litigation, issues about the voter register and why the Electoral Commission wanted to compile a new register, and whether it was right in terms of some of the modalities that it was putting in place to get people registered. So all of this happened, and again, the court stepped in and tried to deal with all of these issues as soon as possible so we could proceed. And then we went into the election and we had our second presidential election petition, which maybe at some point later on in the discussion, I may come back to. But the point, just to sum up for the introductory remark, is to say that increasingly we are seeing a lot of election litigations. Question is, does it mean that we are not doing better in our election management process? Or we are growing, our stakeholders are becoming more fond of resorting to that option. Of course, from a cursory point of view, it's for us, advocates for good governance, we think that definitely election litigation is a better option to violence or the use of violence. And so we welcome that. But I think there are other lessons that we also must be speaking to. What are some of the issues that underlie these election-related litigations? Are there issues that we perhaps can deal with, the election management body working together with stakeholders can deal with beforehand, before they even go to the court? Because take it or leave it, they take quite considerable amount of our time. We all have to put our hearts and our times on all of these processes, waiting anxiously to see what will become of these processes. If there are other alternatives in terms of other ways in which you can address these issues before they go to court, are these realistic solutions that we can look up to? And then where, of course, if there is the eventuality that people have to resort to the courts, then, of course, that process must also continue. So there's some positive development for us. We think it's a positive development, but at the same time, it also signals some caution to the election management body and other relevant stakeholders that there are issues that we really need to be able to talk through, to dialogue, to work on addressing before really they get out of hand. Because sometimes we also know that the outcomes of the court processes do not necessarily bring about peace or bring about the resolution that we want to have. And so it's important that we look at other alternatives whilst we still explore the mitigation aspect of things. I think I'll hold on for now, then we'll come back to it.
Thank you so much, Rhoda. I will jump to you, Jaffa Makanga, your last election experience.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting me. I'm very humbled for this opportunity. If I just have to talk about the last experience, would be giving you almost a third of my experience, the country's experience. Uganda has had a past history of more violence, no democratic elections held, or all elections have been ending in disputes ever since the first general election of 1980 that saw the current president Yoweri Kaguta Museveni heading to the bush fighting. We ended up in a civil war that lasted 5 years, claimed more than 1 million people. Then when he came in, we've had a series of elections from 96, ended up in disputes, then 2001, 2006, because our duration is over, is 50 years of a presidential term. Then after 5 years, we have to go into a general election. Ours has always been a disputed outcome. Even up to now, the recently concluded one in which I participated almost directly as an activist, people power supporter, love of change, and a national unity platform member. We registered a lot, but as usual, everyone expects justice to be got from the judicial system, which has also its hiccups. And it's from there that we're still, even up to now, in dispute. We are contesting what transpired, something that is clearly a wrong experience. And if we do not do anything about it, I don't think our country will ever see anything like this. So from there, we look at other people. Actually, I admire my sister from Accra, because when we read in the history, they had the times of turmoil, and after then they entered the democratic republic, the fourth republic created by the late Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings. Actually, those people, we admire them, and some other countries. But in East Africa, it is only us that are suffering compared to you people. We also admire you. Apparently, that could be my preamble on my experience on the past elections.
Okay, Peter, we jump to you.
Right, thank you very much for this opportunity, and apologies again for that break in viewing. But the Zambian perspective in terms of the last election and the court processes, of course, just like many countries, Zambia has had almost all its elections from 1996 to date petitioned. And previously, the petitions will be in the High Court and then move to the Supreme Court. But then now, from 2016, we've had an establishment of the Constitutional Court, whose mandate was then or is to hear presidential petitions and within a stipulated period of time. The challenge that has been with the wording in the Constitution is that one, the Constitutional Court will only hear, but the issue of determination is not well elaborated in the Constitution. The provision states that the Constitutional Court will hear a presidential petition within 14 days. And so in the 2016 election, the UPND petitioned the results. And so many of their issues were actually centered around, trying to understand what 14 days actually meant. Did it include, working days or even weekends? So in doing that, actually the petitioners had their case thrown out because of lapse in terms of time. So, and stakeholders believe that that wasn't a very good thing to do, and thought that the Constitution needed to be very, very clear and elaborate in terms of what happened. But I think one thing that really makes the judiciary look or seem to be very, not very professional is that I think the petitioners had a lot of issues that they raised, and also had to amend their own petition several times, which meant that, of course, the 14 days that was given was not sufficient. But again, in terms of the actual ruling on the issue of deciding whether the case should be thrown out based on the time, there was also a divide in terms of what the bench actually decided. I think a few of them felt the petition should have gone ahead and be heard, but a bunch of them, well, a good number of them, felt it had lapsed based on the time factor. In terms of petitions at the National Assembly level, well, these still go to the High Court, but I think the courts have set a very bad precedent that for an election petition at national level to be nullified based on violence, for example, the petitioners should prove to the courts that indeed the person vying for that position had a connection to that particular violence. So as long as you are not able to prove that this particular person actually sponsored the violence, or indeed they were actually almost involved in the violence, then it becomes difficult for the courts to say that violence actually affected, the outcome of the electoral process. But from our standpoint, we believe that any form of violence undermines, the credibility of an election, and also, serves as a stumbling block for people to go and participate. So from where we stand, I think that was a very misguided position by the courts of law, and so we've not really benefited from either the establishment of the Constitutional Court or otherwise. Quickly, other related election issues before the courts of law, and what we felt, one was the eligibility of the president. Again, going into 2021, people questioned the eligibility of the president, given that he had, twice held office, according to some people, and that the Constitution, did not provide for that. But in the ruling of the Constitutional Court, they began to bring in issues such as inheritance, of a term, which are not explained in the Constitution, nor were argued out by the respondents' legal team. So the petitioners felt that the court actually decided to be themselves, the defender, right? They became the respondents. So in that scenario, there is really bad precedent that is being set by the courts because of the, one would say, the impartiality or whatever is going on in the Constitutional Court. So a lot of confidence has been eroded, even though we had expected that the Constitutional Court would actually help dispose of some of these electoral-related petitions in time. Another case quickly, which is before the court, is that of the Chapter 1 Foundation, where they have sued the Electoral Commission of Zambia with regards the issue of a new voters register against, the old voters register, and also issues of continuous voter registration. We already have a register now that has been developed, even though the case or the matter is still before court. What does that do to us as civil society? What does that mean to whatever the outcome of the court process would be? So I think basically maybe from our end as civil society, also as maybe litigants, is to reflect further and look at the timing so that we avoid pushing the courts into making very bad decisions that may, well, not really very bad, but decisions that might be seen to be made in the interest of the country moving forward. But at the end of the day, this actually, makes a step back in as far as developing our democracy, because our belief is that continuous voter registration is a requirement in the Constitution. But secondly, that once the commission decides on whether to do a new register or do an update, that is something that ought to be done from a very consultative and engaging point of view, regardless. So I think going to court at the wrong time actually provides or limits the extent to which we're able to enjoy, the benefits of a particular ruling, and also that the judges may make their decisions based on the country moving forward and not looking at the long-term effect of whatever precedent they're trying to set. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Alex, over to you. You sit on COPAC as well, so.
Thank you so much, Patience, and thank you so much to my fellow panelists who have given a very fascinating and I would say panoramic view of elections in Africa. We hear from West Africa, from East Africa, and from Southern Africa, and I would say that the experiences that they have shared are very much similar to the experiences that Zimbabwe has had over the last 41 years. So when you talk about the last election, it has to be seen in that broader context. As Jaffa has said of Uganda, Zimbabwe's very first elections in 1980 were highly contested. And the reason why they were highly contested, my apologies, I'm not sure what's going on with my room lighting here. I'll probably have to switch off my video. Yeah, so the point I was making is that as far as Zimbabwe is concerned, the issue of elections has always been problematic. And one of the points that I might want to share with my fellow panelists here is that the ZANU-PF, which is the ruling party in our country, was actually a petitioner in one of the very first court cases because it was unhappy with one of the parties which was being supported by the colonial regime and by, they thought that it was being supported also by the colonial power, Britain. That was the UANC, which was led by Bishop Muzorewa. And, they had a lot of money, which they were throwing around and holding big parties, inviting people before the election. And ZANU-PF was unhappy with what thought was bribery of voters. And, 40 years later, ZANU-PF is the party that continues to face these accusations of bribing voters whenever their election disputes. So it's ironic that a party which has been in power for 41 years does not seem to appreciate the challenges that it faced when itself was in opposition. There have been, like I said, various contests over the years, and I sat in the Constitution Making Committee between 2009 and 2013. And one of the things that we tried to do then was to try and come up with the process of handling the electoral dispute. And we came up with what we thought would be a good way of dealing with the problems of elections. Because one of the things that we've seen, after 2000, when the MDC became a political force in Zimbabwe, was that the courts were taking very long to hear cases. Just as a matter of example to my fellow panelists and those who are listening, disputes over the 2000 elections were only resolved after 2005, which essentially meant that the parliamentary term had expired by the time that the matters were fully concluded. The result was academic. It meant nothing. People had been represented by illegally elected MPs for 5 years, and those who should have been in office were not in office for that time. And these delays were not accidental. We believe that they were deliberate. And so it became important to set time limits. Another example is the 2002 presidential petition by the late Uganda, who was challenging now the late President Mugabe as well. In 2002, we have never had a judgment in that case. And actually, the judge who had that case is now sitting in the Constitutional Court of Zimbabwe. That's how embarrassing it is. So the delays in dealing with electoral disputes have been a big issue in Zimbabwe. And that's why when we did the constitution making process, we thought that it would be good to set out a very clear time limit so that it would be easy to have quicker decisions. But that is also what brought its own problems in terms of cases that are also being decided by the courts, because now a petitioner goes to court, it's a good case, and for some reason there are delays in the process, and then he goes to court and he's in court and the court says, well, he is out of time. And so you find a perfectly good case being thrown out, not on substantive grounds, but on technical grounds. So these are some of the challenges that we've been seeing so far as Zimbabwe is concerned. But Patience, maybe I might just make a few general observations from what I've heard and from our experience in Zimbabwe. So elections do tend to produce contested outcomes, and the reason is because those who would have been declared to have lost will be unhappy with the outcome, but they will not be just unhappy with the outcome, they're also unhappy with the process. And so our problem is in the process of the election, how we conduct the election, because that then leads to a problem insofar as the outcome is concerned. Point number two is that the election dispute resolution mechanism itself needs to be fair and impartial, and the expectation, at least by those who petition the court, is that the process will be fair and impartial, and that it will lead to an outcome that is fair. Now, another point which I would like to emphasize is that I think that the problem that we're having both in Zimbabwe and as I see in other countries is that the judiciary has become a political referee, or is a political referee. But this leads to a problem, which is number one, I'm going to put it in two ways. Number one, it is the judicialization of the electoral process of politics. And then the flip side is the politicization of the judiciary. You see, because the judiciary becomes a very important player in deciding the outcome of the election, it becomes a very important arena in the electoral process. So what seems to have happened is that we have transferred the notion or the idea of electoral contestation from the ballot box, from the polling booth to the court of law. Now, my observation, and I say so as someone who participated in the process of creating this process, is that I think there's misplaced faith, I think, in the courts, in the judiciary, as an arena that can properly resolve political disputes. I think that as politicians, are outsourcing something that should be properly handled and dealt with through the political process, and I think placing it in the hands of the judges. And I mean, I have to say, with a few exceptions, such as Kenya and Malawi recently, I don't know if there's another one, it is very difficult to overturn the outcome of the election through the courts. The judges are not in a position, they're in a very, it's daunting for them to make that decision. And I'm not even sure that as unelected players, they should actually be having that role. It sounds very, very good when you are in an opposition position, when you think that you can go to court and the court will be able to be a place for salvation. But I also want people to think it another way. Assume that an opposition party properly wins an election and the ruling party goes to court. They will also go to court and they might also get that election overturned. So it's like a double-edged knife. So I have great difficulties myself now with the benefit of experience, with the hindsight, whether we are not placing too much faith and too much responsibility to decide electoral issues in the hands of these unelected men and women in the judiciary. They even have the capacity to do so, and are they even able to do so within the realm of the political arena? I am gravitating more towards citizens exercising their agency in terms of pushing for a political solution to the issues that would have arisen. I will just conclude, Patience, with Zimbabwe in 2008, by way of example. The outcome was an inclusive government, which, for those 4 years seemed to produce an outcome which was fair for most people. I think most Zimbabweans look back to that period as a period which was better than any other period. But I also wanted to say that that situation was not resolved by the courts of law. When Morgan Tsvangirai withdrew from the election in 2008 rerun, there was a political solution to that problem. He made a political solution, he created a political crisis, and the political solution was found to resolve that problem. Maybe not satisfactory, but it was a political solution. I can assure you, Patience, and my fellow panelists, if that matter had gone to court, the Supreme Court of Zimbabwe, the Constitutional Court of Zimbabwe, would have easily declared President Mugabe to be the legitimate winner of that election. The result is that the judiciary becomes an instrument of legitimizing, of giving a veneer of legality to elections that would have been conducted in a manner that is unfree and unfair. Let me stop there, Pat, and perhaps then engage with other issues. But I hope that those observations will also resonate and give some food for thought to my fellow panelists and those who are listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I would love to find out from Rhoda and Peter, because you've spoken about your experiences from your countries and how there's been some improvements, especially Rhoda on your part. But I want to understand that when we go to elections as citizens, we are assuming our democratic rights. So when we do go and I vote for my person, and then this issue ends up in courts, is it not judiciary now meddling in democratic rights? And then do us, the citizens, understand the legal terms, the legal, I think Peter's the one that mentioned that people did not understand what 14 days is. Is 14 days including Saturday and Sunday? Does 14 days include the day you get the summons? all that language for me sitting at home who has just gone and cast my vote, how does that then affect my experience of elections going forward? If I go and vote, but it ends up sitting in court and it's a petition, and they're using big words. In Zimbabwe in our last election, when the MDC took ZANU-PF to court, we started learning fulcrum of the peace. We started learning all these terms that we had no idea what they meant. They were exciting to us, but we did not understand. So I think Rhoda and Peter, if you can come in and respond to this, that how does this then affect the election experience and processes from not just the parties, but to citizens in a country? Okay, Rhoda, you're still on mute. So Peter, you'll speak after Rhoda.
Okay, sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah.
All right, so from Ghana, I mean, and you asked a very important and interesting question, which is what these election petitions and the outcomes mean for the average voter, and what the role and interpretation of the judiciary is. If I look at the outcome of our 2012, that is 8 years ago, the presidential election petition, and the outcome of the 2020, the last year, the presidential election petition of last year, is quite interesting. If you look at the previous one, about 9 years ago, we had, if you look at the outcome, the verdict of the courts, you had almost a close division in terms of the opinion of the court. So you had 3-5, 4-5 in favor of the candidate who won. And so that shows that if the opinion of 1 or 2 judges had changed, it means the outcomes of the elections could have been different. And what does it mean for the person who voted and probably felt, this is me and this is all of us casting our ballots. We've gone to court, we've gone to the ballots or to the polls to cast our ballots. These are the outcomes. Of course, somebody doesn't agree with the outcome, the person takes it to court. The court examines a number of things. And if you go into some of the opinion that was proffered by some of the judges, you could see that some of them were convinced that these were issues that were significant, and so to that extent should overturn the outcome that had been declared by the Electoral Commission. So that just lets you know that the courts now have become very powerful arbiters in the electoral process, and the opinion can actually change the outcomes. But of course, that will have to be based on evidence. But the question that keeps coming up will be, what amount of irregularities is legitimate for you to invalidate an election? And I think that is something that is quite delicate to deal with. There are irregularities all the time, but what is the threshold? At what point do you say that this is enough, this is significant enough to overturn the verdict? If you look at what we had in 2020, it was a unanimous decision. So I think it was clearer, the message was clear and strong, that the judges didn't seem that there was any merit in the issues that had come up. But of course, if you compare the outcomes of the 2012 and that of 2020, in 2012, the party that lost up to date doesn't still believe that they lost the elections, regardless of the opinion of the court. They believe that they won it. And that in 2020, last year's election, it's a different party that also lost that. So the two main parties have all lost an election petition in court. And all of them don't think that they really lost the elections, but the proceedings had been subjected to all manner of interpretations. But the other issue you raise is that for the average person, how they come to understand the terminologies. And we had a lot of that from our last election. So there were at various stages, the party that had taken the petitioner, the person who had taken the issue to court, our former president, they had various issues that they challenged or they raised, they presented before the court. And almost all of these issues, the court ruled against them. And so for their supporters and for some commentators, they had their own interpretation of what that meant. But for the average person, if you didn't have any legal understanding, it was quite difficult for you to understand some of these. And even for people who were learned, there were all manner of divisions about what people thought should be consistent with good practice. So that our electoral commission, for instance, their lawyers argued that they didn't want the electoral commission chairperson to be cross-examined in court. The petitioner challenged that position. The court ruled in their favor and said yes, they couldn't force the chairperson of the electoral commission to come and be cross-examined or come and testify actually in court and all of that. There were people who were arguing that for the sake of good governance, it's important that you allow the electoral commission to at least come and say something to the average person, let them explain what happened and all of that. So people are making arguments about, from a good governance point of view, what should be. And the other lawyers, the other schools of thought who think that it shouldn't be about what should be, but it should be about what the basis of law. What does the law require, require the judges to do under the circumstances? And all of these were quite difficult. If you didn't have the legal background, it was quite difficult. And of course, we have this culture here where, and it's not just Ghana, where from the different sides, the petitioner and the defenders, you had lawyers sitting on radio, on TV, bringing up their own interpretation. You had other independent actors, lawyers also making interpretations of all that was happening. And all of that even probably added to the confusion, okay? Because on one breath, you would listen to somebody and think that this is how it should have been. You go and listen to another lawyer and you think, no, it shouldn't have been that way. So it can be confusing, but I think the bottom line is that the Ghanaian had the faith in the courts that whatever the issue is, we don't have an agreement, but because we have rule of law, we are all agreeing to move forward with our processes. And I think that is what is saving us. But of course, there are other issues that we think that in future we can do much more so that we can have some understanding that they have lost the case and they lost it. They lost it on these grounds. I mean, if you read if you look at the judgments from the courts, it's quite detailed. The question is how many people will be able to read and understand that these were indeed the real basis upon which the courts arrived on those conclusions. So there's a lot of education that has to be done. A lot has been done already, but I think we need a lot more so that people can follow, even from their limited point of view or their limited understanding of the procedure, legal procedures, and because it helps deepen the trust we have of our judiciary, if people can understand why they rule in a certain way. And like I said, the basis is there, they provide the basis, and the judges took time. And some people were even making the joke that probably they knew that people would not read the verdict. That is why they took time to read all the pages of the judgment so that at least people will have an idea of the reasoning behind their verdict. So these are probably areas that we can still do more, educating people about the basis of, or the basis upon some of the basis for some of the conclusions that we get from court proceedings, and to help them also play by the outcomes that we get from the courts.
Oh, thank you for that. Peter?
Yeah, interesting reflections from Rhoda. I'll just pick it up from where she's left off, and probably just say that ideally, all these issues of electoral malpractice and things like that should not exist. But because they do, and because there is also a legal framework around the elections and the electoral processes, then the judiciary becomes very important in as far as trying to interpret and also guide in terms of what a particular provision would mean. But importantly, I think the judiciary, the legislature are very important in addressing all these electoral issues. For the legislature, how effective are they in making laws that promote equal participation, that ensure the protection of the vote, and many other things, that they develop laws that create an even environment for every political party to, one, access the media, to be able to stand everywhere anywhere without actually them, being victimized or things like that. Number three, that the incumbency does not take advantage of the resources at their disposal and do so, to actually, disadvantage others. That said, the judiciary then has a duty to, look into these issues and be a guiding voice, for instance. But there is a problem when the judiciary themselves assume the role of being, or taking a side and being able to make pronouncements like, no, but this one is only finishing a term or is only inheriting a term. Those sentiments should not come from the judiciary. The judiciary should look in between the law as well as look at the evidence and be able to make a judgment based on the evidence provided. How do we ensure that citizens are able to follow through these issues? One, I think it's from as far back as civic education. One of the issues that we continuously grapple with here in Zambia is that due to high levels of poverty, there is a high level of vote buying, right? To the extent that people can sell their voters cards, they can sell their IDs. Secondly, that young people are involved in violence for, small favors, like even, a bottle of beer, a bag of mealie meal, and things like that. Once we begin to talk about these things and look at their impact on the electoral process and indeed on the results, then we'll be making a connection between the importance of that vote and following it through. The other thing is that in most cases, most often than not, usually petitioners petition election based on so much on the management of the election itself, right? That the commission did not adhere to ABCD, that the commission did not enforce ABCD. Right now, the commission is looking elsewhere. A lot of things are happening. Political campaigns have been suspended due to COVID. There's unbiased coverage or unbalanced coverage of the media by the public media. There's a lot of political violence, mainly, perpetrated by the ruling party. And in the previous election, because ministers continued to occupy their offices, they had resources at their disposal that they used. And that was against the provisions of the Electoral Code of Conduct. So all these things actually put the commissions in the mix. But then we go out there and petition on results and not so much on the process leading up to those results. So usually that is where things are lost, because we'll tell you that once counting is done in a polling station, results are announced, they are almost as official, they are just taken, and then for those that do PVT, will be able to see all these differences. So this is where the difference is. But if the petition is on the on the management of the election as well as on the results, and also the processes leading to the elections, perhaps citizens would actually make the connection between how how unbalanced coverage, led to this outcome, or indeed how political violence actually led to this particular outcome, or many other things before the election. So I think the idea then now is to bring citizens to a point where they are aware in terms of what they need to do in the electoral process, but also that we cannot separate citizens from political parties, because citizens vote for political parties. So ultimately, they'll be waiting to hear from political parties or politicians in terms of their next course of action. I'm not sure what provisions are in different countries, but I believe that it's a losing candidate that has got the right to petition those results. And so this is the person that fronts the petition. But of course, we've seen that citizens have come out in numbers to support those candidates that they feel indeed they've taken the day. But like Rhoda said, I think it's about the different interpretation of the law by different people. One lawyer says this, for a minute you think this is actually the correct thing to do. The next minute you speak to somebody else, they tell you something else. And even those of us that have read a bit of books are also in the mix. We also can't apply ourselves, because we are only we rely so much on these on the lawyers and the interpreters of the law, and so this really creates a problem. But I think over and above all, there is need to pre and post election to engage in conversations that strengthen our electoral legal framework to an extent where we actually allow for systems that provide for a due process of the law to take place, and also that the commissions, there is a mechanism that they can be held accountable in terms of how they manage different processes of the election and the electoral process, as it were.
Thank you, Peter. I want to go to Jaffa Makanga and ask, and I ask this because if you look at, especially in our region, our elections, the outcomes, it ends up becoming as if it's struggle parties, which is the parties that have been with us for many, many, many years, against young people. So the issue of age in our politics has become a very big one. And we are in a time where social media is also playing a part. We have seen countries, including mine, switching off, cutting out the world via social media and saying no more. We don't want people to either see in or people to speak out. And you spoke about it, I think, Peter, you raised the issue of age. And I know in my country, the age of when can someone run for president, which is why the issue of age is now a big issue across Africa, across our region, where it seems like the young people, me, I'll put myself there as a young person, we, the young people, seem to be fighting against struggle parties. And this tends to become bigger than what the actual issue is. So I think, Jaffa, to you, my question is, how is also the term of office? Because that is something else that I've heard from all the countries that has come up, the issue of term of office. We have it on the Constitution, but then when we then go out into the world, do something different. So how is the age difference and age experiences affecting elections during our time of social media? And how is social media playing a part as well? That's for you, Jaffa.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think when you look at Uganda in particular, most of the issues that you're talking about have been so much politicized to an extent that we decided to choose a revolution that would work with reality, other than these two things that have been so commonly used. Like people now, when you talk about age, that it's age fighting us. In our case, it is now, we change the narrative and we are moving so much towards the reality. And we've attracted more of those old timers to join us because they saw that we are now looking forward for a better Uganda. That's why in our case, we chose a revolution other than no more participation of the usual politics as it had been played in the past. When you look at our experience ever since we started, the government or the incumbent, he has served 35 years now in power, and he came into power fighting what the other old leaders were doing. And actually, if we can remember his first words, he had promised that this is not just a change of guards, and rather a fundamental change that will see him as a soldier leaving power with his colleagues to politicians or people, the civilians, to take control of their country. So what we realized, and the reason as why we chose the people power slogan, is to empower our people. We make sure that we use the time we have and the resources at our hands to give these people the knowledge that the actual power or the power and everything that has to determine their way of life lies in their hands. And that is the reason as why even the social media has been fought during the times prior or even after, immediate after the elections, the prior and past the elections. In our country, the violence has done more part in frustrating all the efforts of having the new breed of leaders ushered in to run the country's events. If I can throw you back to our real experience, I've had Peter and Loda's submissions about the petitions. For us, they did not even give us time to go through everything. Immediately during the consultation, we were not accorded a chance. Our candidate was not even granted time or a chance to consult the people. Whenever he could move out, the government, the incumbent could unleash the resources, the state apparatus, the armed forces, all other resources available to frustrate all the efforts of consultation. And in actual sense, we did not consult at all. And then when it came to the real time election process, people were arrested. The agents were arrested on the polling stations. Most of the areas, like the western part of Uganda, was not allowed to participate in the presidential elections. Actually, we had a lot. And since the introduction of the social media, all who have gotten use of the social media is the young generation. Uganda being a country with the largest largest group of young people, the youth, we've managed to overwhelm the people with the knowledge and emancipation process as we are doing so right now. So this time, the age of the difference we've got amongst the usual groups, the political parties that have been there from the time of say independence up to today. Actually, we think that is gonna be the way forward, and we hope it is gonna bring a new face of politics in our country if we follow, or if we are given a chance to unleash what we have. Yes, and for me, in my submission, I think when I look at what what caused the petitioning, or the basis upon which we petitioned the results, I think if still have the system of employing the government or the incumbent, the president, with all the powers that determine who the leader, the judicial, the judges are gonna be, because he appoints in our country. It is almost a matter of appointments other than having people that come in on merit. We look at the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission is appointed by the president according to the powers vested upon him by the Constitution. There, we think it is, if we do not raise such things, we are still doomed, and we we shall be far away from realizing anything like democracy, or always have disputes on elections, since all these people are answerable to the president. They always do what he wants them to do. And if you look at our country, I remember during the past elections, before we went in, we had a challenge of COVID, and at a certain point, the president was quoted saying that if someone would organize elections during this COVID period, he would be mad. But we again saw him coming against his word and organizing elections amidst the lockdown, is the country's lockdown. During that period, he called us, he organized the elections, and the electoral chairman, the electoral commission chairman, a judge by profession, other than saying, taking consultations about the process or how to organize the election to the parliament, the legislature that is supposed to legislate on the laws that you have to follow, he ended up going to consult the president, who is the head of the executive. So the government is expected to be having 3 organs, all of them are autonomous against the other. And now none of them should overrule what the other has to do when it comes to the deliberations of their duties. However, in countries like mine, it is the president to decide on each and every issue. All of them have to be answerable to him, including the judges, because he has got all the powers to put them into the places. A case in point is that this creates a lot of conflict of interest, where we saw, like in this case for us, when we petitioned the results, with the disputed results, we were given 15 days to submit the presidential petition. And prior to that, immediately after casting his vote, our presidential candidate, His Excellency Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu, was placed under house arrest for 11 days. So he's given 15 days to petition, but 11 days he was under custody, house arrest. He wasn't granted access, not even by his lawyers. He was not allowed to leave the house. And so this time was not even changed. When we petitioned, we had to make a lot of amendments on the petition. And then that time was also not granted to us. As I mentioned above, that the president has got a lot of impact on these people, or on the judges, as he's the one that appoints them almost. He has everything to do in putting them into the positions of service. The current Chief Justice in Uganda, who was formerly a member, a personal lawyer for the president, and now is acting as the Chief Justice. So we even saw him during the petition process, the hearing, that he even forgot his role as a Chief Justice and acted as a defendant's lawyer, to an extent that he even rendered the defendant's lawyers inactive during the process of hearing, the cross-examination and everything. So we ended up withdrawing the petition in dispute, because we cited that according to what we had seen, we could not expect anything like justice coming out of that process. So I think if we are to look at solutions, to find solutions for such petition disputes happening in our country, in our countries or in the region, we need to find ways of having separating the presidents from his role into bringing the judges or these judges into positions of service. If we still have that, we shall always have a conflict of interest, and then we shall always have this problem more resurfacing every time we engage ourselves in elections. It is said by those people practicing law, I think, that it is justice should not only be done, but rather has to be seen to be done. And if we have such, if we find ourselves in a position where we do not appear to be satisfied, all disputes will turn political, and it will be always politics ruling over everything. So, like the new generation of the new breed of Africans, we need to look ahead of what the colonial system of leadership or the colonial system of politics was introduced to us, and try to refocus on our forefathers, the way that the societies were organized, because these people had a vision of the land. But it seems that we've been brought up in a situation where we have to follow our predecessors that were trained by exploiters, and people would love to continue exploiting us even after when they left or they gave up direct contact in our motherland. So we need to have the African way of dealing with matters and avoid the erosion of the type of life we live. I always refer to it as a theoretical way of life, where people will go and read books, expect people to live by what was written in the books, yet actually when you go down to the ground, the actual practice of life is totally different. Mm-hmm. It's us now to have a vision of how we best want Africa to be governed by ourselves and rules by ourselves, something that our old timers feel uncomfortable with.
Mm. Thank you so much for that. All right, so I would like to ask Alex, when it comes to the issue of, you spoke about how the judiciary is now, unfortunately, politicized, because when these issues end up in court, we hope for the best, but because of all these things, and I think Jaffa was speaking about their Chief Justice in Zimbabwe, we have our own Chief Justice saga that I will not go into detail about, but it sounded very familiar. So what is the role of judiciary in protecting elections? And I'm asking this in a normal setting, not in the setting that we unfortunately find ourselves in. What is the role of the judiciary?
Well, thank you, Pat. And, first of all, I must say that all things being equal, what you expect of the judiciary is that it is able to interpret the law and to resolve disputes of facts as it would in any other matter that comes before it. The constitution and the electoral laws of any country provide the procedures of how elections should be held. And therefore, the role of the judiciary is to make sure that everybody abides by those rules. and that the standards of free and fair election are upheld. That is the normative view. That is how it ought to be. But very often, how they ought to be and how they are often worlds apart. And so I think this is the political reality that we have to deal with. I've been impressed by the way that the Kenyan Constitutional Court handled the last petition and of course the Malawian. But I'm also conflicted about it because much as there are positive developments on the continent, they also provide, I think, another false hope and a false sort of narrative that it is possible to resolve this dispute through the court of law. And therefore, whenever there is a problem, you are often told that you should go to court and you must get the matter resolved in a court of law. When you understand in your own context that it is not possible to have that, it becomes very, very problematic. So, my opinion, Patience, is that once you have the judiciary, the arbiter, as it ought to be, and I think it has become a regular affair in most African countries, as an arbiter, as the decision maker in electoral processes, they actually become part of the electoral process itself. Become an institution just like the Electoral Commission, just like police, that are part of the electoral process. And the independence of the judiciary becomes fundamental, just as the independence of the Electoral Commission is also fundamental. The problem that we have seen, Jaffa has made reference to it, is that very often the connection between the presidency and this institution is so close that it becomes almost impossible. We had a situation, or we have a crisis in Zimbabwe at the moment, where the Chief Justice, who should have retired on the 15th of May this year, had his term extended. And that amendment to the Constitution was specifically designed to allow him to stay in office for another 5 years, which guarantees him to be in position for the 2023 election, should there be another dispute in the election. He knows where his bread is buttered, he will return the favor. So I'm very, perhaps, maybe I didn't make it very clear from my first statement. I'm not optimistic at all about the judicial or legal process as a way of resolving this political dispute. I was interested to hear in Uganda that they withdrew their petition. We did the same thing in 2013, and I was part of that team. And the reason why we withdrew that petition was because we did not want to give the Constitutional Court the opportunity to perform the legitimation role that they were designed to perform, because we knew that the court was never going to overturn that result on account of the proximity between the judiciary and the executive at that particular time. So it was a waste of time, but it was necessary to show the world that we wanted to go ahead with the process, but we decided not to because the arena was tilted in favor of the executive and the ruling party. So I don't have much optimism in the judicial route in countries like Zimbabwe, and I think Uganda, as we have had. I think Ghana has done fairly well, but I don't know again, the dynamics in those different countries. I'm just worried about the idea of political actors outsourcing agency in political processes to the court of law, to men and women who, by the way, are not even elected. And so, they become the decision makers in a country that has 15 million, 20 million, 60 million people who have gone into an election and voted. So I think it's important for Democrats to really take a very sober look at what has gone on across the continent and what is going on in terms of how democracy is balancing itself with what is happening for this legalization or judicialization. Because those who know that courts have become important, they will of course make sure that their people who are likely to rule in their favor will be in position insofar as those elections are concerned. I just wanted to conclude, Patience, with a response to my brother Peter. And I would have said, if the situation in Zambia had happened in Zimbabwe at the moment, we have a clause in our constitution, and we were very deliberate about this clause when we were making this constitution, which say that a person serves 2 terms, and usually a term is 5 years. But we also say that if a person serves at least 3 years in office, that will be deemed to be a full term. So I would hope, and I'm sure there are many intelligent people in Zambia, they will probably consider this, but when they do make their constitution or amend their constitution in future, I think it's something that may be worth taking into account to make sure that there is a clause which at least makes it clear that a person who has served either 2 years or 3 years in office is considered to have served a full term. That would have, in my opinion, have resolved the issue. But let me stop there for now. Thank you.
Okay, from the chat box, Marvin says separation of power is not visible in the arms of government. We are still far, and the executive is running the show. Unlike in South Africa, at least democracy is being enjoyed. The rest is a pipe dream. And Eden is agreeing with you and saying great submissions at Alex. So now I would love to find out from all of you as we prepare to wind up that in short, I would love for you to sum up. I will give you, because between politicians and lawyers and everything else and authors, there's many words that you want to use. So I will give at least 3 minutes to each of you to give a roundup, and I will give you idea of how you can round up. I want to find out that why do elections in Africa end up in courts? Why is it not just a cut and dry issue? Rhoda and Patience are going to the polls. Rhoda has won, Patience hasn't won. Let's all go home and work better for next year. Why does it end up being violent? We've heard about violence. Why does it end up in courts? Why does all these things? And why do we then create laws and break them and all that? And what is the role of women and young people when it comes to elections? Because they tend to constitute the majority when we're talking about the campaigning. Yet when it comes to holding positions of power, it's something that is totally different. And maybe if you could also cover why petitions fail, because we've heard others withdraw them, and we've heard that at times there's some dirty tricks that are played to make sure that some petitions don't make it to court. And then at times we also just don't go and we don't understand. I think that's what Peter alluded to before. And what do you anticipate in the coming elections in your country, in the region, because we are one. So we in Zimbabwe have our next election in 2023. And yeah, so I would love in 3 minutes for you to close, but also to try and cover that. And we will see if we have questions that will be coming in that I might ask you to respond to. So I will start with Peter.
Right, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Alex, for that piece of advice. And just to note that indeed that is there is a provision that speaks to that. However, the challenge that was there is that President Lungu fell between two constitutional transitions, right? That in 2015, he was elected when Michael Sata died, and he served for 1 year, 6 months, which of course, when you look at the current constitution, is that he never held office. But then this is a whole confusion taking from one constitution to the other, and also the issue of having been sworn in twice and things like that. So this is where the confusion is. But however, the current constitution does provide for an explanation of what constitutes a term. In terms of why do we really have to, have petitions and things like that? I think it's because of the way elections are managed. And the idea that everybody has got the right then to, have their case heard in whichever way or form. So if I believe that, yes, Rhoda was a sitting minister at a time, and I think she abused her position and, used it to influence, voters, I then have to make that case. But then the real problem actually stems from the managers of elections themselves, that they do not adequately enforce the provisions of the law, that they turn a blind eye to the incumbency, and for a simple reason that has been elaborated by everybody here, that we lack a separation of power and independence of these institutions. Well, at least I can say that for our country, Zambia. The Electoral Commission of Zambia is not autonomous. It still, depends on government. The president has gotten a role to play in, appointing the commissioners and so on and so forth. The judiciary, Chief Justice and the judges at whichever level are appointed by the president, ratified by Parliament. But you all know what happens if Parliament, if the opposition has the numbers in Parliament, then all those things will just, go as they are. The role of women in all this is very important, because from where we stand, our voters register stands at 52% of women. And so this, even the population itself is that women are more than, men. And so they need to begin to take center stage, be appointed, or even run for office. But then the environment, because of socialization, stereotypes, and many other things, do not allow them to do so. So how do we ensure that we try and change this? So it's an issue of, conscientization, awareness raising, and also putting in place quotas that facilitate for these women to take up some of these positions. Where does it start from? Well, I'm against having, to legislate some of these things, but I think we can start from somewhere. It could be legislated, and then later on, something that begins to be practiced naturally. And so this is what I could say about that. The youths, persons with disabilities, I believe that, especially in Zambia, politics for youths need to be redefined. I think they need to have a much more, visible and stronger role to play, other than, providing security to the big guys, or even being the ones that, are in fighting battles. So we believe that there could be an opportunity for young people to take a more productive, proactive, and responsible role in as far as redefining our politics is concerned. Our elections that are coming in a few days' time, actually 51 days in counting, already have a lot of issues with them. One, I think many of you that we've interacted with on this platform will know that with about issuance of national registration cards, which was done in a selective manner, and in places where we felt were the strongholds of the, the ruling party, that to us presented an unbalanced access to, requisite documents that aid people to register as voters. Secondly, during the voter registration process, our observations showed, significant misapplication of the different standards in terms of procedures, especially as they related to, staffing of electoral commission staff who were issuing voters registers cards. and that some of those, provinces that were below the national average, our recommendation was that they needed to be, serviced further. But also the biggest issue around voter registration in the country was the decision, the new register and discard the old register. Well, that is an important move because it helps to, if you like, the register, because it could have maybe people that were deceased that still are on the register that has been existing for more than 10 years. So this was an opportunity to actually clean it up and have a true picture. But our concern is that the voting age population estimates, as well as the figures that were registered from there, do not correspond. They are at variance, and the variance is quite significant in as far as looking at the regions and places that are deemed to be opposition, strongholds and ruling party strongholds. The other issue finally was the resistance by the Commission for any institution to conduct an audit of the voters' roll, which we believe is an important undertaking that tries to add credibility to the register. And so all these unresolved issues, coupled with an even playing field where the police are only providing security to the ruling party and always shutting down rallies for the opposition, where the Commission issues a directive to, without further consultation and engagement, to cancel all form of rallies, campaigns, and whatsoever, where you have the public media that is a mouthpiece of the government and the incumbent, which does not provide equal access to, to all the voters, that really becomes a problem. Other issues of, unbalanced or impartial implementation of the Public Order Act and many other laws, as well as the reluctance by the Electoral Commission of Zambia to invoke parts of the Electoral Commission or the Electoral Process Act, which actually, speak to the observations that we are making, and political parties being able to be sanctioned. They have the power to disqualify, and they are not doing all this. And so we are at the point where an election has already been questionable based on various processes that have taken place. So what do you expect when election results are announced on 14th or 15th August? People would have their petitions already drafted and the grounds would have already been founded. But you don't want to go into an election with that kind of mood. Let's go to an election knowing that the Commission has played the judiciary is there to interpret the law. The legislature has confidently developed laws that facilitate for an equal opportunity for every Zambian to participate either by being voted or voting in that particular election. So those are the challenges before us, but we believe as CCMG, we continue to engage different stakeholders and see if there is something that we can solve and save this. Thank you.
Thank you. Rhoda?
Yes, you said 3 minutes, so I'll just try and be quick. First question was why do we have election petitions? I think Peter answered this. I'll just add that sometimes it's because of the way in which he mentioned broadly election management, but I would like to deal with the aspect of stakeholder engagement. Okay, already we know that there's a lot of mistrust and a lot of suspicion between the political parties, especially those in opposition, and our election management bodies, which requires greater transparency and engagement, constant engagement. It can be daunting on the part of the EMBs, election management bodies, always trying to open up, always trying to explain things up. But if they understand the sensitive nature of the activity that they are managing, then of course, it becomes clear, it should be clear to them that you need to be doing it. You have to be engaging your stakeholders, especially the political parties, all the time on any decision, on any major issue that you want to bring about, you want to introduce, you want to implement, and all of that. From what I see here in Ghana, sometimes It's just the misunderstanding on certain issues, certain decisions that sometimes degenerate. So a party doesn't understand why the Electoral Commission is doing this. Instead of the two actors engaging each other, you see not much of it, and sometimes parties then tend to go the legal way because they feel that that's really the result that they have. Sometimes the EMB also tries to explain, but parties also refuse to understand or accept what the explanations that they are being given or they are being served. But I think the point is that constant engagement is something that EMBs must continue to do. And of course, on the part of our parties, we expect them to have the goodwill, because if we're engaging you and you still don't have the goodwill, then it becomes quite difficult and tricky. So I think these are areas that can be enhanced if we want to address some of the issues that really end up in court. And then once they end up in court, the other question you ask is, why do some of the election petitions fail? I think from my point of view, I would say that, I mean, first of all, the inability of the actors to really establish a case and provide the necessary evidence or the supporting evidence. If I'm to go by what we witnessed in Ghana in 2020, I mean, just last year with our presidential election petition, if you saw the case that was presented, even from my non-legal perspective, I could see that it was a quite weak case. Of course, from our observation point of view, the work that we had done with our observation of the elections, it was also clear to me that there wasn't anything really fishy. There were mistakes, there were issues. The question is, were they significant enough? What is your evidence to suggest that the mistakes, errors, irregularities that occurred were significant enough that you want the elections to be overturned or to be annulled? So sometimes just the evidence and the ability to build a really strong case. The other issue relates to the technicality. Sometimes parties, the way in which maybe they present their case is something that really give them away and they are unable to proceed. But that is, I'm speaking from here, some of the things that we've observed here in Ghana. Then the other issue question you asked about is, what then can we anticipate? I remember that when we had our first presidential election petition in 2012, after the verdict, what the party said was that then they were going to be vigilant at the polls because they felt that regardless of how strong your case was in court, you couldn't win it. And so you needed to focus your attention at the polling station. So they were going to be a lot more vigilant, and which we saw in the subsequent elections. And again, if you look at what happened in our 2020 election petition, there were issues about the collation process and what agents of the petitioner were supposed to have done or didn't do, and all of that, questions around the role of actors, I mean, party agents and the rest, candidate agents. So we expect that moving forward, they will also strengthen their vigilant role and try to strengthen their internal mechanism. So you have one party that really was able to come with the process that was monitoring what the Electoral Commission was doing at any point in time. And it was quite impressive. We expect that parties would also enhance the ability to monitor the processes. Not that monitoring will cover any shoddy dealings or rigging, but I think it helps their own understanding that we are clear that we're with the processes every stage of the way. So if these are the outcomes, we have a good understanding of what the outcomes, how the outcomes came about. So we expect a lot more vigilance. There were some people thought that maybe because they didn't get what they want, next time they will be going to court, but that's not what we expect. We expect that they will step up their participation in the processes, their vigilance of the processes, and of course, where they still think that they don't have proper resolution of any issues, we still expect parties to resort to the court. So increasing resort to the court is something that we expect will be happening in the future. But for the point about women, and we have the same thing, it's a major, I think it's a major weakness for our democracy, as far as Ghana's democracy is concerned, that we still don't have a lot of our women in good places as far as political participation is concerned. And we have some young people who are doing quite well, but I think one of the major factors relates to the cost of politics. And for my center, it's something we continue to highlight. The increasing cost of politics, doing politics or going into elective office is something that is detrimental to participation of all segments of the group. If you're looking at a young person, somebody under say 40 years, I mean somebody from 40 years and above, or even under 40 years, the question that you would ask yourself is, at 40 years or at 35, what is the state of the average Ghanaian, average young person who may have an interest in politics? What is their state? What is the state of their resources? How resourceful will they be materially, so that if they have an interest in contesting for political power, they will be able to pursue that interest. So if there are certain practices like vote buying, vote selling, which are quite serious over here, and we are not dealing with this, then it's definitely going to deter people from contesting. There are other factors also, social-cultural factors, especially for women. We are in 2021, but there are still people who don't accept female leadership, and this is where we have a lot of work for institutions like civil society organizations, like National Commission for Civic Education, our traditional leaders. They've been doing quite a lot of that, but I think we still have to engage our public on the need for them to entrust power to whoever they think is qualified and eligible, regardless of their age and gender. And these are areas that we hope to see more. Thank you very much.
Alex?
Thank you, Patience. I think that the two colleagues have exhaustively dealt with the issues that you have raised. So I'm going to take the license to say something different by way of conclusion. I always like to conclude with a way forward to see what can be done. Now, I think that it's important for us to have a regional approach to the problem that we are seeing. What we have seen today is a broad survey of the problematic nature of elections in our countries. And we are only representing a very tiny, percentage of African countries. Many of them, also have similar problems. We can talk about Nigeria, the Zambia, so many other countries have faced similar challenges to what we are seeing in our own countries. My view is that understanding the regional patterns of the challenges that we are facing and the commonalities of the problems that we have means that we need to come up with a more regional approach to the solutions as well. Now, I'm not sure that we can expect our governments to do so. They already have the African Union, they already have the Southern African Development Community, or the East African Community, or ECOWAS, and very often, with the exception of ECOWAS, which I think does a little bit better than the others, they often act as trade unions of these old African leaders. So I think that the task really falls to civil society to really take up the challenge of developing, and I'm going to suggest something here, of developing what we might call regional indicators. So, there is something called the World Bank doing the Ease of Doing Business Index. It's a very fascinating concept, controversial, of course, but what it does is that it sets out sort of markers or indicators of what it means to be a country that has conditions that are easier for businesses to come in and invest. Now, what is important is that, so they rank countries from number 1 to 180. Now, if your country is number 180, you would want to improve. What you see is that countries, they are very keen to be seen to be doing better. I'm sure you know that. Our Minister of Finance is always making reference to how well he's doing and so forth. They like to be seen to be doing well. Now, I think that there is need for something similar. I know that we have the Mo Ibrahim Index, for good leaders in Africa and so forth. But I think that we need something that is more focused on elections and on governance issues. It doesn't change things in 5 years or 10 years, but we are taking a long-term view because we want to build institutions. And I think that it's important to build an institution that does such a job, even ranking the judiciaries as well, because nobody wants to be seen as number last, among their own peers. And I think that it's important to try and emulate that, to incentivize good electoral behavior. For me, are not in the court of law. The solutions are in the political arena, and politicians really need to understand, especially in countries like Zimbabwe, Uganda, that there is not much that is going to come out of that. Put faith in the courts is almost a waste of time at this particular point in their history. And it's important to really exercise political agency by way of exercising the rights that are provided in the Constitution. I think.
Wow, thank you so much, Alex, for that. Jaffa, your closing remarks?
All right, thank you very much. I would like to appreciate all the participants. And in my closing remarks, I think I might deviate a little bit from what they've given. I acknowledge the fact that all that was given is right. But when I look at the genesis of what exactly causes the disputes that we're seeing, the election disputes that coming up every now and then, arises from the fact that we turned politics into an economic venture, a source of income to many. And when people want to rise to positions of a service, they invest a lot. And for someone that invests, of course, you must expect all the kinds of corruption and whatever comes up as the face of politics in Africa. In our country, for instance, there is a lot to be done. And that is why we even chose to have a revolution rather than normal politics involvement or engagements as in the past. And actually, anticipation of what would come into the next elections cannot be given at this point, because since we are in a revolution, for us, apparently we are demanding our victory. So we are not going to stop until when the revolution has won. And after winning, of course, we are looking at the next station, that is rehabilitation of all the institutions. So we have to see many things put in place. We look at, say, improving on the Constitution itself, giving it more power that other than what it is it has right now, where the politicians in power are stronger than the Constitution itself. In our country, for instance, it's always the Constitution or the laws have to bend when a politician wants something to be passed, especially the president or those close to him. When they have anything to be passed, it is the law to bend so that their interests are permitted. So we're looking at issues like improvement of the time given to people who are petitioning the presidential petition. When you look at the time given to the person to petition and compared to the challenges ahead of them, because a man is supposed to gather information from the whole country as the electorate, as the constituency, the electoral constituency he has at hand. You give him 14 days or 15 days. Of course, that is something that is way beyond a myth that someone expects anything fruitful from there. Then when we look at the way people come to positions, as I mentioned earlier, a lawyer, a judge to be appointed, we need to separate the hands of the leaders in power from appointing such people to such positions of service if we are to see justice served. And actually, making it public for the appointments of, say, judges, people who are going to work to serve in court, ours is so secretive that we've got institutions in place that are more of just a cover-up of what is really taking place, because the Service Judicial Commission is there, but you will never know, the public will never know that people have announced that we need judges to be appointed for either the High Court, the Supreme Court, or elsewhere. So such things have to be looked into, and we cannot do it when we have the same system in place with people that do not want to leave power at any cost. Believe me, if you still maintain those ones, you will only be daydreaming. You cannot realize anything. Again, there are very many issues that we look up to, that if we are to see anything like change, we need to force a drastic all-round change in every aspect of life in a country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so as we heard from all our panelists, they were sharing from their countries that they represent, and this is a regional issue. And we realized that when they were sharing, as we could relate. I'm from Zimbabwe, and the issues that were being raised from Accra, there were issues that were being raised from Uganda, from Zambia, and I could relate because we are one people. So to those that have been following and wondering what Electalk is about, our goal is that of advancing democratic governance and citizen participation and ownership of elections in the region. That is what we want to do. And if you want more information on this, I would suggest that you follow ERC on Twitter, and their handle is @ERC Africa in small letters, @ERC Africa. And on Facebook, it's Election Resource Center. And you can get more information on that. In my closing, I would like to say thank you so much to all the panelists. Rhoda, thank you. Alex, thank you. Jaffa, thank you. Peter, thank you so much. And we realize that we are one. We are separated by borders, unfortunately, and nationalities. But when we talk about our struggles and we talk about our dreams, we are but one people. And to steal from Peter and Zambia, I actually wrote down one Africa, one nation, because Zambia has that one Zambia, one nation. And Mama, thank you so much for coming through and commenting in the comment box and putting in your thoughts as well. To the team behind the scenes, thank you so much for making all this happen. I think it's important for us to push as citizens that we have a say and to do more. Let us not give up. In Zimbabwe, we have a campaign that's going on now, which is register to vote. I think it's important. Thank you, Unism Trust, for coming through. I think it is important to push citizens to go to the polls, to learn more, so that when we do get to court, as Rhoda was implying earlier, that we need to understand the processes of law, not just for us to just go and vote and not understand what will happen after. So if you're a citizen, wherever you are, make sure you register to vote, make sure you understand the laws in your country, and make sure you understand the rights and you push for them. And you do not stop. Don't give up. Jaffa did say before, when we're doing sound check, a luta continua, the revolution continues. We will not stop. And I think that is how I end it today. A luta continua to everyone. Do not stop, and let us do right by Africa. Thank you so much, everyone. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for coming through.
See you later.
Oh. Yeah,